let's get into the top 10 horror movies of 2022.
Well, sometimes that is better.
Get yourself a Red Right Hand shirt while you can. They're only gonna be around for the next 48 hours and then they're gone forever. Forever! Hey everybody, what's up? KillJoy Jake here, and instead of having friends, I have horror movies. Today we're talking about my top 10 horror movies of the year. If you want to see what the community decided on, what was their favorite horror movie, check out this live stream up here. It was a blast, and I can guarantee you there will be more bracket live streams sometime in the future. Now, I have to preface this video by saying 2022 was absolutely one of the best years for horror that I have lived through, at least. This is my 4th top 10 list I've had to make doing this channel, and it has honestly easily been the hardest out of every single one I've ever had to do. I usually have like 1 or 2 honorable mentions. I have 10 because there are so many movies that have to at least get recognized in this video, in my opinion. So before we hop into the honorable mentions, just a quick reminder, this is just my top 10, my personal favorite 10 movies of the year. I'm not saying these are like the definitive best of 2022. Everyone else's opinion is trash. No, I am not saying that at all. That's completely ridiculous. These are just my 10 favorite movies from the year that were horror related. All right, getting into our first honorable mention though, let's talk a little bit about Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. Bodies doesn't make my top 10, but I still really like this film. It kind of blew me away for its crazy twist. Spoiler alert, there is no killer. Like, that is insane. Just Pete Davidson accidentally sliced his throat at the opening of this movie, which is totally bonkers and such an interesting left turn for a murder mystery to go down. Despite its characters being super unlikable, Bodies, Bodies, Bodies is written really well. There is some little tiny things at the beginning that come back to be way bigger things later on in the film. You know what I'm talking about with that mirror light. I had a blast with this movie the first time I watched it, but on rewatch, it's not as great when you know the twist is coming, I think. I think that first watch, though, is incredible, and I highly recommend it to anybody who's just a big fan of murder mystery or horror in general. Another honorable mention, once again, these are in no particular order, was Chloe Okuno's Watcher, which honestly was just a super well-executed thriller film that I happen to really enjoy. Watcher is a super simple film. Like, it doesn't do too much, but what it does do is execute it perfectly. I feel like a lot of movies nowadays have to, like, keep packing on like 100 different elements to it to make it something different. Watcher doesn't feel the need to do that. It just kind of like does the one thing really well, and it does that one thing really well. That's all it needs to do. Micah Monroe kills it in this film, who is also in It Follows, one of my all-time favorite horror films, so I was super excited to see her and Chloe Okuno work together on this project. If you haven't heard me say Chloe Okuno enough on this channel, I just absolutely adore everything she works on, including Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. Orphan First Kill is another honorable mention I wanted to bring up. I was really blown away by this movie. I kind of wasn't expecting anything from it. I mean, it's a sequel to a movie that I feel like didn't need a sequel. This ended up actually being a prequel that has a really good twist to it. That was the big thing I didn't think they would be able to do with a Orphan continuation in general, is just give us another good twist. Because I would argue that's like the best part of the original film, is when you get to that twist and you're just like, oh my god, this is insane. I would actually say that Isabel Fuhrman's performance in this movie is even better than the original, just because she has to play a child and she's no longer a child like how she was in the 2009 flick. Mad credit to her for slipping back into that role so seamlessly. And Julia Stiles is also really good too in this sequel. I'm actually super pumped for more Orphan movies. If you have another good twist you can throw at us every single time, I am there. Like, seriously, you can make 100 of these movies. I didn't realize the full potential that this franchise now has, and it clearly does. So I'm excited for more Orphan movies in the future. Mad God from Phil Tippett is another super crazy honorable mention that I just think it would be a sin to not mention this one. 30 years of work essentially went into this film, and it just got released this year on Shudder. Mad God is honestly a trippy masterpiece. I loved this film so much. Don't watch this film on substances, kids. Let me tell you that. Don't do that. Super trippy art style, crazy animation, just a bunch of hard work, blood, sweat, and tears went into this film. Like I said earlier, it would be a sin not to mention this on some kind of 2022 horror list. Mad God is basically if a Tool music video was a full feature-length movie. It's bleak, disgusting, disturbing, and I had a blast with it. Go watch it on Shudder, not sponsored yet. Fresh on Hulu is another honorable mention for me. I really enjoyed this flick, a little Sebastian Stan cannibalism kind of film. You know, that's a whole subgenre, right? It's not even at all. This is the only movie that would fit in that subgenre. It was really cool to see the Winter Soldier play a villain in this movie, and Daisy Edgar Jones is also phenomenal in the lead role here. I'm very excited to see what else she does in the future, as well as director Mimi Cave. When I first saw Fresh, this was another movie that blew me away the first watch. Second time, not as much, but I still love this film a lot, and I would highly recommend it. Hulu killed it this year for horror. Speaking of Hulu, Prey is another honorable mention for me. I loved this film so much. It may be my favorite Predator sequel. I'm kind of tied with Prey and Predators right now for the number 2 spot. I'm not 100% sure which one I like more, but Prey kicks ass. Amber Midthunder totally steals the show in this one, playing a great counter to the Predator, who's like this big overarching villain. That is what this franchise needed so bad, was a good counter to the Predator. I feel like we just haven't really gotten that. Like Adrian Brody sort of in Predators, but I much prefer Amber Midthunder against the Predator in this new film. And going back to the original, I would argue that's what made that original film so good, was Arnold Schwarzenegger being this big, tough, crazy guy going up against this like giant alien thing. It's insane. It's awesome. Prey is really the only sequel in this entire franchise where I'm feeling that again, and I really enjoyed that. It was like this spark that this franchise had kind of lost. You killing it, Hulu. Oof, these next two are gonna break some hearts, but The Black Phone is just an honorable mention for me. I love The Black Phone. The second and third acts of this movie are kick-ass. Like, would not change a thing. Such an incredible film. I honestly thought this was gonna be one of my favorites of the entire year. I even drove all the way out to Detroit to see this puppy early, and I was like kind of a little lukewarm on it. Like, it's kind of just a 7 out of 10 for me. I really enjoyed it, but that first act is a little sloppy to me, and I don't know, it's just wasn't like my favorite of the year, but I still really enjoyed it. Once again, Ethan Hawke's performance alone is worth watching this thing. Highly recommend. And another one that is probably gonna break some people's hearts is Smile. Smile is an interesting film. How I described it in my review is it's kind of like an overture of modern horror. Smile borrows scares and sequences from other movies from the past 15 years, but does them very differently. Like, for example, there's the same jump scare sequence that we got at the very beginning of Hereditary, also kind of in a similar place here in this film. It's been heavily compared to It Follows and Drag Me to Hell, while also still offering something fresh though. Unlike another horror film that came out this year that just copied and pasted another horror film that was big from the 80s. I really enjoyed that element, and it also has more to offer than just that too. Like, Sosie Bacon in the lead role gives an incredible performance. It is heart-wrenching to see this character devolve into madness throughout this entire flick. Really great performance from her. I remember having an issue with some of the love interests. Like, I think Kyle Gallner's character and Jesse T. Usher's character probably could have gotten merged into one person, because like Jesse T. Usher just disappears from the second half of this film. So I was like, okay, that's a little sloppy. But besides that, I love Smile. I think it kicks ass. Seriously, one of the scariest films of the year, for sure. And I promise after this, we're done with honorable mentions, but also VHS 99, which I seem to be the only person who liked this film, but that's okay. VHS 99 is probably my second favorite in this entire franchise. I really enjoyed it. I loved the addition of just more humor to this franchise that has always been a little silly, but they kind of upped the ante with that, which is why I think most people didn't really care for this one. It's much sillier and much grosser than any previous entry, which personally I love. Those are two flavors that work really well for me. I know some people don't really like gross horror movies, but that is my forte. That is my gross cup of tea that I will sip on all day, baby. The big thing about VHS 99 that sets it apart from some of the other ones for me too is I feel like they finally figured out the formula a little better. Instead of just doing 4 shorts that are connected loosely by this like kind of nonsensical wraparound that most of the movies follow, this one instead just completely throws that out the window, has 5 shorts back to back to back pretty much that are all pretty good. Some of them, like Tyler McIntyre's Gawkers, rely on tropes that like past VHS films have done, like it's basically just Amateur Night again, but with Medusa. But I feel like they captured the essence of this franchise in this film once again, while also taking it to new places, which is why I really enjoyed it. Like, Flying Lotus's sketch is one of the most disgusting and upsetting things I've seen all year. All of the other directors, including Maggie Levin, Johannes Roberts, and the Winters, did an excellent job on this flick as well. I seriously loved every single sketch. Super gross, super silly. I had a blast with it. All right, but now let's get into the real top 10, baby. These are my top 10 favorites. Now, we were just talking about the Winters with VHS 99, but let's talk about one of their other movies that honestly, gotta be honest, I like this better than VHS 99. Deadstream on Shudder, coming in 10th place. Deadstream is a super experimental found footage flick that kind of ups the ante on the silliness, like kind of going towards the route of like Evil Dead 2 silliness and schlock, but also mixing that with a bunch of fun found footage elements. It's kind of genius. It blew me away. I went into it with no expectations and came out the other side just having a blast. Like, I'm really busy most of the time, so like I usually watch like half of a movie and then I have to do something and come back and watch it later. Sometimes I forget. I sat and watched this whole thing when I turned it on. I couldn't turn it off. I had to pee halfway through. I didn't care. I needed to finish this thing. It was so enthralling. Our main character is such a jerk, but you have to know what happens to him. It's one of those characters where you hate him, but you have to know what happens and where it goes. And where it goes is a lot of fun and super crazy. Lots of twists, lots of blood, lots of guts. Really good time overall. I'm unbelievably excited to see what Vanessa and Joseph Winter have up their sleeves next. I'm just eagerly anticipating it. Some new directors to throw on your radar for sure. And one other thing I want to mention is that Joseph Winter's Scream is already iconic this year. Like, between VHS 99 and this movie, the guy's Scream is simply just iconic. Somebody help me! Coming in 9th place is Scream 2022. This film really blew me away. I was actually kind of surprised by how well they came back to this franchise and brought back a lot of fun elements of it. Although it's not my favorite in the entire franchise, Scream 2022 had a lot of fun things to offer this past January. I love the Scream franchise, but it's never really scared me. Like, I really enjoy it. There's a lot of very fun elements to talk about with this film. I think it's one that you can talk about for hours with your buddies and kind of like debate about certain things, which I love, which is obviously why it's a huge focus on this channel. But I've never really reeled back in my seat because of a kill in one of these movies. And Scream 2022 was kind of the first movie to really do that for me in this franchise. I know there weren't chase scenes in this movie, but I kind of appreciated the fact that they threw that out the window just for one film to give us some slower and more agonizing deaths. Like, Wes's death is so hard to watch, in my opinion. Watching that knife just slowly go closer to his neck and then finally pass in and out is just so unbearable to watch to me. It really caught me by surprise because I just wasn't expecting that from a Scream film. And it just really hit me hard the first time I saw it. That was terrifying in my opinion. And then this film also features one of my favorite reveals for a killer ever, with Amber just pulling up a gun out of nowhere and shooting Liv McKenzie in the face out of nowhere. The tension building in this movie is incredible. I was so blown away by that, and I cannot wait for Scream 6 coming out in March of next year. I know you've heard me talk this movie to death, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But I loved it. It's a great movie. It easily makes my top 10. Coming in 8th place is the Adult Swim holiday Yule log, also known as The Fireplace, a movie that most of you probably don't know about. Basically, everything in my top 10 was something that caught me by surprise at one point, but this was the one that surprised me as of most recently. I cannot believe how good this movie is from where it starts to where it finishes. It just keeps getting crazier and crazier and crazier. As you probably know from watching Red Right Hand, I love films that utilize both found footage and just a regular, more modern style of filmmaking. I love the mixture of that, and The Fireplace does that really well by basically making its first 30 minutes all found footage from one angle where you're kind of not able to see too much of what's going on. So it lets your brain run wild and just start thinking about all the awful things that may or may not be happening off screen. I kind of don't want to tell you too much about this movie because I know some people just simply haven't seen it, so go check it out, go watch this thing. It is much more than just a Yule log, let me tell you. Not only is there some great horror attributes to this movie, there's also a great couples drama like right at the center of this thing that I was really taken aback by. Once again, I don't want to share too much, but I thought it was fantastic. Highly recommend go check this puppy out. Coming in 7th place is Dario Argento's Dark Glasses, another movie that once again took me by surprise. Wasn't really expecting much from it, but I really enjoyed this film. It may be one of my favorite Argento flicks. Now give me a break on that last one because I haven't seen too much of Argento. I've really only seen a couple of movies, but this one I watched and just fell in love with. Something I've noticed watching a couple of Argento's movies is that the mystery element is usually not like super crazy. In the majority of his movies, I've been able to guess the killers, but what I'm realizing from Dark Glasses, this is kind of the movie that gave me this realization, is that it's not really about that. You can't watch this like you're watching a Scream movie. It's much more about the style and the music and the crazy giallo blood. It's about appreciating that a little more, and I think I really kind of found that with Dark Glasses. With all that being said though, there's some great character development happening throughout this entire flick. It's very tragic and very sad. You feel really bad for the main character here. And since we're talking about killer reveals, I think Dark Glasses may have the funniest killer reveal of all time. I had to pause it. Tears were streaming down my face. I was laughing so hard and I had to rewind and watch it over and over and over again because it is the most ridiculous killer reveal of all time. I'm the man who stinks. Another movie from an old school director, David Cronenberg, is coming in 6th place with Crimes of the Future. Crimes of the Future is actually a feature-length remake of one of David Cronenberg's original short films from the 70s, which I think is really interesting that he went all the way back to that, kind of remade it and did it way better nowadays. Crimes of the Future is probably a top 10 Cronenberg for me. I really enjoyed it. It is so smart and so gross. Oh, it's a good mix. I also loved seeing David Cronenberg work with Viggo Mortensen on a movie that's more focused towards his body horror subgenre opposed to like what he was doing in the early thousands, like Eastern Promises and History of Violence. Like I love those movies a lot, but it was kind of weird to see Viggo in one of these movies, like more of like his like 80s and 70s kind of stuff. In a lot of ways, Crimes of the Future kind of feels like an overture of all of David Cronenberg's work, and I think that's why I like it so much. It kind of pulls from the best of all of his different kind of stuff into this one movie. Every time I watch Crimes of the Future 2, I catch something new that I didn't catch the last time. I'm like, oh my god, that's why this is so important. That's why they keep focusing on this weird subplot that didn't make sense the first time. I love that you can keep coming back to this film and finding something new every single time. There's not too many movies like that out there, so I think this one's really special and definitely deserves a watch. Speaking of movies where you catch something new every single time, Jordan Peele's Nope comes in 5th place. The more I watch this film, the more I start to think that maybe this is Jordan Peele's best film so far. First time I watched this film, I didn't really connect everything that was going on. There were some things that felt like, oh, maybe Jordan just put this in there because he thought it would be like kind of crazy and kind of cool. But the more I watch it, the more I realize everything works so well together in like a thematic sense. It's a really smart and deep thinking film that you definitely need to watch a couple of times. With that being said though, if you don't really give a shit about any of that, you can just watch this as a popcorn flick. And that's what I think is so genius about the way Jordan Peele makes movies. This is a total indie flick with a big budget disguised as a blockbuster movie, is I think the best way to describe it. Like, it is so unbelievably weird, and it would never get greenlit by a studio if it was done by another director, I think. It's a shame that studios don't give a chance to more movies like this, because I just really enjoyed this one. I can't believe how popular it was and how well it did. The entire cast is amazing here, between Daniel Kaluuya, Steven Yeun, and fucking Keke Palmer. I'm trying to remember everybody, but there's so many people in this movie. They're all great. Like, everybody gives an amazing performance. Keke Palmer especially gives an amazing performance in this movie. I have just fallen in love with that woman this year. I just absolutely love all three of Jordan Peele's movies, and I am eagerly anticipating whatever his 4th feature will be. Coming in 4th place is Pearl, the prequel to X that just kicks ass. Mia Goth's performance in this is unsettling and possibly the best performance in a movie all year. She shines so brightly in this movie though that some of the other characters I just don't really even care for, because I'm just so curious to see what Pearl is going to do next. When it focuses on a side character more than her, I almost like kind of lose interest in this movie. But like I was saying before, Mia Goth's performance in this lead role is so strong that you just can't look away when she's doing something batshit insane on screen. And my god, that 7-minute long monologue towards the end of this film is maybe the best use of tension building I've seen in a movie all year, like bar none. I was sweating halfway through that monologue, just trying to see what will happen on the other side when the camera finally breaks. It's just one long continuous shot on Mia Goth spelling out how crazy she is, essentially, and you're just like, oh my god, what is the shot gonna cut? What's gonna happen next? This was also one of the best theater experiences I've ever had for an A24 film, where usually there's some teenagers in a row ahead of me who are laughing at the movie and thinking it's shit the whole time. So I really appreciated the Pearl theater experience where I didn't have that. I also just want to commend Ty West as well for pumping this script out in 2 weeks while he was in quarantine in New Zealand where they shot this. Like, they weren't even gonna make a prequel. They were just out there to do X, and like he called up Mia Goth. He's just like, hey, you want to stay for another couple of weeks and film this other thing I'm writing? And she's like, yeah, let's do it. I just think that's so cool. Like, they filmed 2 movies back to back and they both came out this year and they're both incredible. But I think I do like X just a little more than Pearl, which is why it takes the bronze for this list. Once again, Mia Goth gives an amazing performance in this, not only as Pearl, but also our lead final girl, Maxine. She is surrounded by an incredible cast of amazing characters, which I think is the big standout from this film versus Pearl. Like, I just don't love the side characters as much in Pearl as I do here in X. The entire cast of this film is great though, and one of the big standouts in my opinion is Brittany Snow as Bobby Lynn, who is just so fucking funny throughout the entire movie. Even like Kid Cudi was really good, and I don't even think he's acted in anything before. Like, I remember kind of like hearing about this and being like, oh, Kid Cudi's gonna be in a new A24 film. I was like, I hope he gives a good performance, but I've just never seen him act in anything, you know? That was kind of like my mentality with it, and he kills it here. I mean, everything they set up with this character is really well done. Him talking about his experience in the military to Howard too, I think is really interesting. There's a lot to pull from that conversation, a lot to talk about. I will absolutely be watching this one for years to come, blown away. Taking the silver medal is Barbarian, another movie that I think is just an easy 10 out of 10 that kind of blew my mind watching it. It's been a while since I watched a movie and I had to buy the tickets to the next showing immediately after walking out of the movie to see it again. Barbarian was that for me, and I was just genuinely so blown away by this. I had to watch it again and just see if I missed anything. There's so much happening in this film, and I think it all works. The way that this movie is structured too is something that I've seen, and it's very controversial, something that most people don't really like. I dig it. I think it's really shocking and surprising and just leaves your jaw dropped for way longer than most other films. Like Bill Skarsgård getting his head smashed against the wall and then to have it immediately cut to a completely different story about a character you'd have no knowledge about is really interesting to me. And to have all of that connect to what you've already seen, they do that twice too in the film, is just like, what the fuck is going on? It's one of those movies where when you think you have it all figured out, they throw something else into the mix to make it even crazier, and it all works, and it's all set up from the beginning. It all makes sense for why it's there. I've definitely seen more people complain about Justin Long's character because it's just so out there, but like they're literally talking about whoever owns this place like fucked up, and this is the guy. This is the guy who owns the place. And then you're also seeing footage of like the abandoned homes in like the outside of Detroit throughout the entire flick too. Like there's that entire sequence where Georgina Campbell is driving into the city and she's just looking at all the broken down houses. That's totally done on purpose to relate to the Richard Brake character we meet way later into the film. And even though all of the storylines feel all over the place, like one thing is happening in California, one thing's happening in Michigan, one thing is happening all the way back in the 80s, it's all connected by a similar theme. And fun fact, it's something that YouTube doesn't like old Jake here talking about. I also love that this film was directed by a member of the Whitest Kids You Know, R.I.P. Trevor. Seriously, super sad loss. But Zach Krieger absolutely killed it with this film. I used to watch the Whitest Kids You Know when I was like a kid, and it was so cool to see him direct a horror movie now. And for it to be one of my favorites of the year, that's pretty impressive. That's awesome. And to literally nobody's surprise, what's taking the gold? It's gonna be Mr. Art the Clown, because he got snubbed for an Oscar very recently. Come on, Art's gotta take home some gold. Terrifier 2 is a perfect slasher film, in my opinion. It has everything you want if it's a really awesome final girl at the lead and in the center of the film, while also being countered by like the most villainous and evil slasher villain ever. Art the Clown is unbelievably sadistic and fucked up, literally laughing while he is killing people. It seems to be the only enjoyment he finds out of life, and that's pretty fucked up. Lauren Lavera and David Howard Thornton are incredible, and both steal the show every single time they are on screen. I've seen a few people complain about the runtime, which, yeah, it does start to feel a little long when you get towards the end, but if it wasn't that long, I feel like a lot of us wouldn't be talking about it. If Terrifier 2 wasn't this myriad of blood, gore, ultra violence, and just absolute and utter disgusting insanity, I don't think we would all be talking about it as fruitfully as we are now. It wouldn't have had the cultural impact that it has had. Like, making $10 million on a $250,000 budget is insane. And yes, I've seen people compare this to Paranormal Activity, but I just feel like that's completely different. That is a movie that is like much more available to the mainstream public and all that, where this is not. I mean, people were literally vomiting in the theaters for this. I think one guy even had to call an ambulance. I also just love that we have an iconic slasher that you kind of want to root for a little bit in a new movie. Like, most slasher films don't really do that anymore. It's cool to see that in Terrifier 2. It feels refreshing, like a blast from the past. I don't know, just everything about this movie feels like nothing else I watched all year, and that's why it stands out. I can't believe I watched this movie in theaters too. Like, with how disgusting and disturbing this movie is, I can't believe I saw it in theaters. Like, watching Allie's death for the first time, I honestly was getting a little sick. I was like, I can't believe this is still going. And then when he runs back in with the bleach and the salt, I mean, that's the highlight of the film. That is just insane to me. That scene alone will live infamously in horror history forever. I know most people will probably disagree with my list, but that's okay. Everyone has a different list, and with how great horror was in 2022, I wouldn't be shocked if most people had a different list than what I have. So please, leave me your list in the comments below, and we can go through them. We'll talk about some other horror movies that were great this year, because trust me, I probably didn't talk about every single awesome horror movie that came out this year. There were so many, I don't even know how I'm gonna fit it all into this one video. Thank you guys so much for watching this long ranking video of all the horror movies in 2022 that I really liked. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more horror content in the future. Please consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a channel member by clicking that join button on my page. Thank you guys again for watching, and as always, don't forget to kill it out there, y'all.